Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. We are now well into March, but cold spells are not unusual at this time of year. In fact, even in southern counties of the United Kingdom, the snow on occasion can be deep, crisp and even. As this photograph illustrates, I took it on the 19th of March in 2018 in Berkhamsted. It was the second part of the Beast from the East, a particularly cold period of weather. It was close to record-breaking, at least temperatures aloft were. Now, it looks like there is some cold weather on the way through the coming days, but is it going to be anything like this spell was? Well, let's see how it could be developing. Now, here's a view at 18 GMT on Tuesday the 11th. The reason for the chilly conditions starting to establish themselves is that high pressure is centred to the northwest, and down its eastern flank is cold Arctic air, and that's now reached all parts of the UK. The white shading there in the north is indicating sleet and snow showers. I think it could be overdoing the extent of them here, but the general trend is well set. And as I run this, we see the risk of wintry showers continues in the coming days, especially in the north and the east of the United Kingdom. And then through Friday, there are some indications of a disturbance running down from the north, bringing the risk of heavier showery spells of rain, perhaps some sleet or snow in the north, particularly over high ground. It's staying distinctly chilly. Now, just continuing this through to conclusion, that area of low pressure slips away, and then it's high pressure which becomes dominant over the UK. So the showers increasingly fade away, but we stay with rather chilly conditions with an easterly flow of sorts developing. Also, notice how there's a deep area of low pressure to the south of the UK. And there's always a chance with this type of setup that it could extend its influence far enough northwards to start bringing some showery spells into southern counties. That would be something to keep an eye on. The jet stream and upper air temperature sequence from the same computer model run shows things quite nicely. The blue shading over the UK is indicating rather cold air aloft. The mottled shaded area is showing an amplified jet stream looping down and then arcing up and then back down. And as I run the animation through the first week, what we see is the blues remain over the UK for much of the time. They lose some of their intensity, but it's still on the chilly side here at the end. Also, the jet streams remaining rather discombobulated. So, all in all, both of these animations are suggesting that it's going to be quite a chilly pattern which is going to remain in place. But let's have a look at some of these surface forecast charts just to see what that could all mean. These are generated with data from the Met Office UKV model. Temperatures on the left, Wednesday afternoon, and the precipitation sequence there on the right, taking you through Wednesday. And what it shows is wintry showers there, mostly in the north and the east. The pink shading indicates snow. The other colours are showing rain. So I think snow is mostly going to be over high ground in the north, but not exclusively. I wouldn't be at all surprised if a few flakes of snow are spotted at lower levels virtually anywhere through this period. Daytime maximums, single figures everywhere, highest in the south. Very cold there over the Scottish Highlands. Not much changes at all by Thursday. The general theme is the same. The temperature profile almost identical. The showers mainly peppering northern and eastern areas. Friday, this is when there are the suggestions from some of the computer model runs of that disturbance bringing longer showery spells of rain southwards. It looks like it's going to be affecting Ireland, maybe western parts of Scotland, England and perhaps Wales. Snow mostly over high ground in the north, and as it sinks southwards, it increasingly looks like it will be falling as rain if it develops as the computer models are indicating. Temperatures more or less the same, single figures everywhere, the lowest values in the north. Into the weekend, high pressure becoming more influential by this point, so fewer showers, more or less dry In fact, across the UK, just one or two showers there have been shown up in the far north. All in all, though, it's chilly, but I guess with sunny periods developing, it may not feel too bad at all in the afternoon. Then the following 2 days, Sunday and Monday, beyond the range of UKV model, so data from the GFS. Instead, the GFS is the global model, of course, indicates it's going to be staying dry. Cloud amounts varying, temperatures starting to edge up just a little. All in all, though, it's still a chilly picture really for the time of the year. The nights are going to be cold as well. Through much of the first week, there's an ongoing risk of frost. It could be quite sharp on some nights, and when I say it's an ongoing risk, that also refers even to southern counties of the UK. So it's going to vary from night to night depending on the extent of cloud cover, but frosts would appear to be widespread throughout the first week. Snow accumulations with this colder period of weather, well, probably going to be mostly restricted to high ground in northern Britain. This is the 5-day UKV snow depth forecast. You can see the shading there indicates some snow accumulating over the Pennines, of course the Scottish Highlands. Also some suggestions of a little bit of snow for a time there over high ground in northern Wales. The 7-day GEFS snow depth postage stamp animation goes for a similar picture, for snow mostly restricted to high ground in the north. If you remember on postage stamp plots, each one of them shows the forecast from an individual run within the ensemble model. The temperature trend for the first week is quite an interesting one. It's shown here by the MOGREPS G UK Met Office ensemble model. Good agreement for London with the individual lines staying tightly packed together throughout the first week. Temperatures on the low side, just some indications there that towards the end they will be starting to edge up a little, at least through the days. And the comparable chart for Inverness shows a more clear upwards trend towards the end of the first week, probably due to high pressure building down across the UK and maybe more of a westerly influence returning in northern Scotland as we head towards the end of the first week. Rainfall, the 5-day accumulations here are from the ECM and GFS models. Somewhat unusually, the highest totals are in the east, and that's because we've got a blocked weather pattern. Instead of disturbances pushing in from the west, we've got high pressure there centred to the northwest and a northeasterly flow and easterly flow moving down across the UK. The showers therefore being most frequent in those areas. Moving forwards to the 10-day accumulations, the totals have increased a little bit, but not dramatically so, and some suggestions of more of a changeable pattern starting to return. You can see on the ECM in particular, it's got some high rain totals there on the bottom left of the chart over Ireland, and that would indicate that low pressure is starting to come back into play. But in more general terms, how do the deterministic models compare with each other as we head towards the end of the first week? This is the GFS, Tuesday the 18th of March. High pressure centre to the east. It's still quite a chilly picture as I've been discussing. The Canadian model, a little bit different. There's areas of low pressure maybe there and high pressure to the west and to the east. The German icon, high pressure having a lot of influence. Likewise with the European ECM model, but there is that deep area of low pressure to the southwest. The artificial intelligence version of the same model has some subtle differences. The low pressure isn't as deep. High pressure there centered over Scandinavia and something of a southeasterly flow. And finally, the UK Met Office Global, very much a high pressure dominated scenario. Taking them all together, there are differences there. They're all suggesting to a greater or lesser extent that high pressure will continue to be influential at this point. Temperatures probably still on the low side, an ongoing risk of frosts through the nights, but indications from one or two of those that the high pressure is beginning to fray and the pattern may be starting to change. So is that looking like being the case as we head through the second week? As ever, at this range, it is just about the general trends and the probabilities. Here is the 16-day GEFS plot for London. 850 HPA temperatures across the top are recovering towards the end of the first week, and through the second week they are close to or above the average. At least when I say that, most of the individual runs fall into that category. There are some still dipping below the thick black line, the 30-year norm, but the general trend is an upwards one, and it is less cold than through the first week. You can see the shaded out area here is the first week. It's well below the norm. In terms of rain or precipitation, I should really be saying, well, very few spikes towards the end of the first week, but then they start to increase, and that remains the case throughout the second. A more changeable pattern is being favoured, a greater chance of rain. The snow row values very low through the second week. It's just maybe worth highlighting them though. Earlier in the period, through the first week, 21 there for London. That's quite a high chance of seeing a few flakes of snow during the first few days, and what it reflects is the chance of showers coming along, and there may just be an odd flake of snow mixed into one or two of those showers. The 2-metre temperature data table for London, 6 to 10 at the start of the second week being the dominant colour there, the light green. The amount of yellow, though, grows rapidly. Those are runs which are forecasting between 11 and 15 through the day. So the trend is clearly an upwards one after the early chill. The nighttime lows are also increasing, but with that said, a significant number of runs are indicating that it will be chilly through the night. So the chance of ground frost even through the second half of the second week isn't ruled out by any means. And much will depend on just how changeable it becomes and whether or not high pressure will still be continuing to be a player at this stage. Up to Manchester, close to average on the top half of the chart, the upper air temperatures. Once more, the spread increases as you would expect going through the second week, and one or two are still bringing in cold air, one or two going for very mild or warm air aloft, but most are close to or maybe just a little bit above the average, at least for a time. Along the bottom, the rain risk is a similar profile to the London chart. The 2-metre temperature data table for Manchester, the amount of yellow rises through the first few days, so it's turning less cold. The nighttime lows also trending upwards, but once more, even through the second half of the second week there, quite a few of the individual runs are suggesting that ground frost at least would remain a serious possibility. The picture in Glasgow, close to average upper air temperatures, according to most runs, and maybe just worth noting that towards the end, one or two are going for a significantly cold air mass to return, maybe, well, presumably from the north, because it's not been reflected on the comparable chart for London, but it's a long way off, maybe just something worth bearing in mind, and I'll mention why later. Also along the bottom, the rain risk is quite similar actually to the previous two charts. Changeable conditions are quite likely. The snow row value is a little bit higher through the second week than they were on the Manchester and London comparable charts, but not a great deal higher. The 2-metre temperature data tables here for Glasgow. Light green dominates for daytime highs between 6 and 10. There is some yellow in there, but never climbing above 19-20%. And still quite a lot of blue shading throughout the second week. Temperatures dipping to or below freezing point, so air frost being the outcome. And towards the end there, maybe just ticking up a little bit once more. Although that range, it could be ensemble scatter, which is coming into play. Rainfall through week 2. The ECM ensemble charts used here are showing the percentage chance of 5 millimetres or more falling on the first 3 days of the second week. Very low on the first day. The light shading indicates that it's not likely to be, the criteria isn't likely to be met anywhere, but the trend is an increasing one, and on day 3 the green shading in Western Scotland suggests about 40 to 50% likelihood of that happening. Then the following 3 days, an upwards trend continues to show its hand. With that said, it doesn't look particularly wet, at least the chance of it being very wet doesn't look very high. More suggestions for weather by this point will be coming in from the Atlantic, with the greatest chance of the criteria 5 millimetres or more of rain being met in Ireland, Northern Ireland and western parts of Britain. The mean surface level pressure data table for York, generated using data from the GEFS model, also supports the idea of a more mixed weather pattern through the second week as opposed to the first. There's quite a lot of green shading and blue shading. Those are runs which are low pressure orientated, but still a significant amount of yellow and a bit of orange there. High pressure dominated scenarios, but the general theme is for it to be more mixed through week 2 than week 1, and that's reinforced by the GEFS mean surface level pressure snapshot chart for Friday the 21st. It has low pressure centred close to Iceland, high pressure near to the Azores. It's a positive North Atlantic oscillation pattern across northwestern Europe, across the Atlantic region. And it's a similar story with the European ensemble, low pressure there, high pressure down here. But as I always point out with these charts, they are generated by averaging out all of the individual runs within their respective ensembles, and they don't necessarily reflect the most likely pattern, but I think in this instance they are quite useful. They do add some value. When discussing the upper air temperature forecast for Glasgow, I noted that 1 or 2 of the runs were bringing back a very cold air mass towards the end of the forecast period, and I said that it's something just worth keeping an eye on. And one of the reasons for that is because we've had a sudden stratospheric warming event, an SSW. That results in zonal winds flipping from a westerly to an easterly direction in the stratosphere. And on this chart it's represented by the negative numbers. All of the individual runs are in this bracket. They're all showing a reversal of zonal winds. There is a recovery there to around 0 miles per hour. So whether or not this SSW is going to be counted as the final warming this year or not, I'm not certain, because it's possible the stratospheric polar vortex could make something of a recovery. Nonetheless, the key point to note is that several weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks or longer after an SSW takes place, it can have an impact on our weather. It encourages the development of high pressure blocks at northerly latitudes. In turn, we can see cold Arctic air displaced southwards. Hence, there is that chance, which maybe the GEFS was showing, of colder air returning towards the end of the forecast period and maybe beyond it, down from the north. It's worth keeping an eye on. It doesn't, of course, mean that another cold spell is a certainty. Far from it. The pressure blocks could align in such a way that we end up with very mild or even warm and spring-like conditions. And there have been a few model runs in recent days going for something closer to that. So keep an eye on developments is the message. But to summarise the next 2 weeks, week 1, rather cold with widespread frosts, wintry showers mostly in the north and east, but they could become more widespread at times, accumulating snow over high ground in the north. But by the weekend it starts turning drier and daytime temperatures will probably be edging upwards. Week 2, a settled start with widespread frosts, but the trend is for it to become more changeable from the west with showers and longer spells of rain. Temperatures climb. So there we have it. A cold spell of weather, or perhaps a rather cold spell, but not at all comparable to the beast from the east in March 2018. Accumulating snow restricted mostly at least to high ground in northern Britain, perhaps the mountains of Wales. But nighttime frosts will be widespread and quite sharp. What happens towards the end of the second week and beyond is very, very much up for grabs, with that sudden stratospheric warming event perhaps coming into play, or the impacts of it by then starting to have an influence. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Then, as ever, if you did, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, because in that way you'll never miss any of my future updates. Of course, stay up to date with the day-to-day weather developments by checking out the TheWeatherOutlook.com website. Thanks very much now. Bye.